Hi, this is Bishop Craig in Lansing, and this is Take One for the week of the 29th of September. Peace be with you. I am just back from Chicago and the fall meeting of the Conference of Bishops. It was a full fall meeting. This gives me the opportunity to say that the Conference of Bishops is not a legislative body in our church. People think that the bishops get together and make all kinds of big decisions, and we really don't. We're an advisory body. We receive reports or updates, and if invited, we provide advice and counsel. So we really only made, if I'm remembering correctly, 2 decisions at the Conference of Bishops. First, we issued a statement on hate and speech, especially as we turn toward the election. And I expect Churchwide will put that out within the next couple days. And when Churchwide releases it, we will amplify it so that you see it. The other decision we made was to elect a bishop to the Mission Investment Fund Board. So those are the big decisions we made. We received a lot of updates and provided counsel or advice. We received updates from the Commission for a Renewed Lutheran Church, from the social statement on civic engagement, from the renewed or revised candidacy process, from the proposal for new boundaries training, and there was one other one that just left my head, so I'm sorry, but my memory is still a little tired from being in Chicago. If I think of it, I'll add it. We received 3 pieces of immediate information. The ELCA has opened a fund to respond to the hurricane, and Pastor Sprang is in the process of requesting $5,000 from the Synod Council from our Synod to be contributed to that fund. There are lots of resources available for the election, and if you participated in the first session of our class, our adult theological education class, you saw all kinds of screens with all that information. If you go to the ELC Advocacy, it's all there as well. And so you can also visit the webpage, and there's all kinds of information there. And then the third piece is that the ELCA will be releasing resources to help us observe the 1-year anniversary of October 7th and the war between Israel and Gaza. I wish those resources would come out early. I don't know if they're out yet, but we will watch for them and pass them along when we see them. We had our first conversation about bishop elections, which came a little too early for me, but I understand why we needed to have it. 21 synods will be electing bishops this spring, and the Churchwide Assembly will be electing a presiding bishop and a secretary this spring. So the Churchwide organization needed to start now to get themselves together, and I appreciate that. So we had that meeting, the 21 synods that will be electing bishops. And then we had a bit of a really powerful and helpful retreat on discernment, where we heard from bishops who have discerned that it is time to end their service. We had opportunity to do individual and communal discernment about our continued service, and we talked about the qualities we seek in the next presiding bishop. So that was very valuable, and that was just for bishops, as we talked about our own vocations. Then for fun, the bishops organized a trip downtown Friday evening where we took the Chicago River architectural tour together. It was really good to get out of the Marriott at the airport and the Churchwide offices and have an evening to kind of relax together. So that was good. It re-energized us for the last day on Saturday. So that's kind of a quick overview of the Conference of Bishops. I'll spend the next couple of days kind of passing on information and doing some of the tasks the bishops were tasked with when they got home. So that'll be Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday, we have staff meeting. By Friday night, Kathy and I will be in Gaylord for Disability Learning Day on Saturday. If you haven't registered and still want to come, I bet if you reached out to Pastor Clay Bates, that is still possible. And if you don't know how to get a hold of Clay Bates, reach out to our office and we'll see what we can do to help. Because we're really pleased and would really like anyone that wants to come to be able to come. And then on Sunday, I am preaching at Peace in Gaylord, and Pastor Bright is preaching at Grace in Alpena. So that is what the week looks like this week. Turning to the scriptures, first of all, I think you either get Job, which is about integrity, or you get those verses from Genesis about God, from the beginning, God created them male and female, and a man will leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. And what God is, put together, let no one rent asunder, as they used to say in the old days. So kind of the basis, at least in Roman Catholicism, for the sacrament of marriage, but kind of a biblical view of marriage, and I would say a biblical view of marriage, because if you read on from this idealized verses, there are lots of biblical views of marriage in the Bible. So we got to say that. Then there's this wonderful reading from Hebrews on Jesus, and a part of me would just like to, for the sermon, read it slowly and deliberately, and then just say, are there any questions or reactions? So if you've not done so, find the reading from Hebrews and read it to yourself, because it's all about Jesus. And then in Mark, Jesus is on the way to the cross, and the Pharisees are wanting to test or trap him. So they ask, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? And we get that whole conversation, and then we get the wonderful piece about they're bringing the children to Jesus, and the disciples are rebuking him, and Jesus rebukes the disciples and says, suffer the children to come to me, forbid them not, for to these belong the kingdom of heaven. You can tell I learned these verses long ago. And then Jesus puts a child in the midst of them and says, whoever does not enter the kingdom of heaven as a child will never enter therein. And so, couple of things. One, I notice that when the word divorce is in the scriptures, that's the word that jumps off the page. And so people will hear a sermon on divorce based on their own experience of divorce, or what the church had to say to a family member or a loved one who is divorced. So divorce jumps off the page. And the question that I have is, why did the lectionary pair this teaching on divorce with the children? So that's what I've been pondering and investigating. And so I have decided that the good news of these readings are that Jesus really cares for the vulnerable. Jesus really cares for the vulnerable. So let me work through that with you if you have a few minutes. So the word that I want to jump off the page is not divorce, but lawful. Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? Lawful means, is it according to God's will, in keeping with God's will, and pleasing in God's sight? So is it lawful? And I think we'd say the answer is no. Anytime relationships are broken, any relationship is broken, it is not according to God's will or pleasing in God's sight. And yet, sometimes it's necessary for relationships to be broken. That's what's best. We are in bondage to sin and cannot free ourselves. We are captive to sin and cannot free ourselves. Sometimes it's the choice between two difficult things, and sometimes divorce is the best thing. So, The second thing I'd notice is the question is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? Which shows us right there that in Jesus' time, divorce is not equitable. It's patriarchal. The man has the power, the man makes the decisions. And Jesus' answer is, what did Moses do for you? Well, Moses allowed us to write a certificate of divorce, allowed men to write a certificate of divorce, and in some translations, put her away. Could you imagine if God wrote a certificate of divorce and put us away? Wow. So the point is, Jesus says, this is not God's will. This is because of the hardness of your heart. And he is speaking to men. And then he quotes these verses from Genesis and says, anybody that divorces their wife and marries another commits adultery with her. What Jesus is saying, I think, is don't think that divorce or any broken relationship is clean and pure and without consequence. There is always brokenness in broken relationships. And I believe what Jesus is saying is we need to care for the vulnerable. And he is speaking to men about women and children because in his time, when men divorced the women and children, they were not only vulnerable, they were at risk. Even in our day, I know that in divorce, there's joint custody, and it's the kids that need to go back and forth from mom's house to dad's house. They get to carry a good bit of the disruption. And I wonder what would happen if the judge would say, the kids get the house and mom and dad, you get to come and go. Jesus is calling us to care for the vulnerable. Because Jesus cares for the vulnerable. Jesus cares for the most vulnerable. Which brings us to the next part of the story, I think, where they are bringing the children to Jesus. And who do you think it is that's bringing the children to Jesus? I'm guessing it's the mothers. It is the women. So women and children, the vulnerable, are coming to Jesus, and the disciples are turning them away as kind of throwaway people. And Jesus says, no, don't keep them from coming to them, because the kingdom of God belongs to them. The kingdom of heaven belongs to the vulnerable. And then Jesus lays his hands on them, and that is a sign of healing and blessing. We lay hands on others as a sign of healing and a sign of blessing. So the reign of God is about healing and blessing the vulnerable. And then Jesus takes one of these children and puts them in the middle and says, no one who does not enter the kingdom of heaven as a child cannot enter therein. And I now think what Jesus is saying is, if you don't enter the reign of God vulnerably, you really aren't entering the reign of God. The call is to be vulnerable and to care for the vulnerable, because that's what Jesus did. God became human in Jesus. He became so vulnerable that he allowed himself to be crucified. And he did all that for the sake of the vulnerable. For all of us, yes. Because when it comes to sin and judgment, we are all vulnerable, but especially for those who are vulnerable in this life. Jesus really cares about the vulnerable. So that's why I think these two stories are linked, because first Jesus teaches care for the vulnerable, and then Jesus models cares for the vulnerable. So Jesus cares for the vulnerable is what I am going to preach on Sunday. So if you're at Peace in Gaylord and watching this video, you may have already heard the sermon. So I apologize for that. So that is what I have for you today. I got to tell you that my mind is tired, so is my body. We today's Monday, and I always do good that when I travel the day I get back, but it's the day after the day I get back that I'm kind of weary. So I will be spending a quiet day at the desk, and it really is good to be home. And may the peace of Christ be with you always. Take care and have a good week.